Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice little four-game slate here. We have Pennsylvania against Brown, we have Purdue against Rutgers, we have Oklahoma State against West Virginia, and then North Florida against Stetson. And I have Brown, Purdue, Oklahoma State, and North Florida winning these games. All these games are within a few points with the exception of Purdue and Rutgers, which is a 9-point spread today. The rest of the games are all pretty tight. And all three of the games that aren't the Purdue game have at least 135 to 145 points in the scoring aspect, and they're all within 3 points when it comes to the spreads. And then for the Purdue game, it is a 9-point spread, but it also has the lowest total points on the board, even though Purdue is one of the higher scoring teams available. Rutgers is by far in the worst situation of all the teams on this particular slate. I don't have any players from them on my roster, or guys that I'm looking at here, and nobody really stood out for their team. So let's get into the players I do like, though. We're going to start with Clark. Clark Sledger for Penn. Now, he has been, he missed 3 games before coming back the last game, but he has really good potential for big games. He's had some pretty big ones this season long. And his price is really cheap, so he's a nice value play on the slate. As you can see, he's had a couple lower scoring games, but overall, with his minutes being up, he should be good to go here and get a really good scoring game, especially for this price. Then we'll look at Paxton Wojcik here for Brown. Sorry if I butchered your name. He's only had 1 game under 21 fantasy points all season long, and he's averaging over 30 minutes per game. And he also has a nice upside here as a good rebounding guard. He's also averaging 0.82 fantasy points per minute, so he's definitely one of my favorite plays on this particular slate outside of Slate Jarrett. Then we're going to look at Hicklin for North Florida. Now, I really think he's going to be one of the reasons that North Florida wins here. He has 2 games under 21 points all season long. And he's been playing a lot, and he shoots a lot of shots. So, as you can see, he's been shooting a lot of shots the last few games. He definitely takes advantage. He also plays a decent chunk of minutes, and they've been playing pretty well with him. They've won 3 games in a row with him playing really well. And his price point, while it's not super ideal, it's decent enough that he's viable on the slate, especially with the small total plays. And he's also averaging 0.9 fantasy points per minute. Then we'll look at Avery Anderson for Oklahoma State. Now, this is probably the tougher matchup for him, but he is only 1 game all season under 18 fantasy points, which was the last game against Kansas. But I expect him to have a big game here. His ceiling is pretty low, though, so that's a little bit of the risk. But his floor is really good. And his 1 bad game was against Kansas, like I said, so he should do a lot better in this matchup. He's also averaging 0.83 fantasy points per game on the season. And then finally, we're going to look at, for guards, we're going to look at Keno Lilly Jr. for Brown. He has 3 games under 15 fantasy points on the season. His ceiling isn't that high, but he does have some value here just because it's a tight game, and he's done pretty well in those type of games this season. Even if they haven't won, he's had some mostly good fantasy games when he's getting those minutes because he's pretty locked into 30 plus minutes per game. He just doesn't have the high ceiling that we would typically like for a guy paying $7,200, but he is averaging 0.78 fantasy points per minute. For a guard, that's not terrible, so I think he's viable on the slate, and he's just a good option to push away from Wojcik and Hicklin if you choose to do so. For the forwards, we're going to look at Nana Owusu Ani, sorry for butchering your name, for Brown. Now, he's been inconsistent all season long, but he's missed a couple games, but he's been playing 30-plus minutes in a lot of games, so he has some good upside here. This is a better matchup than some of the other tough games they were in recently as well, so I kind of look at the situational, missing a couple games and then being sick and then finally getting back and then having some tougher matchups. But this is a game that he should be able to thrive in, and I think he's at a decent price here. He's also averaging 0.87 fantasy points per game. Then we'll look at Carter Hendrickson for North Florida at $6,800. He's had 3 games under 21 fantasy points all season, but he has also had 3 straight over 30, and I expect that to continue here in a plus matchup for him in a game that should be high scoring. and he's averaging 0.95 fantasy points per minute, which is where we like to be when it comes to forwards. Jaden Parker here for North Florida, also pretty interesting today at $5,200. He is starting, and he's got no games under 10 fantasy points all season long. He does get around 22 minutes a game, but this is a great price for a guy who's averaging 19 fantasy points per game as well. Excuse me, and he's averaging 1.05 points per minute. Obviously, he's going to be limited on minutes, but he's definitely viable on the slate. And then we're going to finally, last but not least, Zach Edey for Purdue. Obviously, extremely expensive, but his lowest game on the season is 33 fantasy points, which was actually last game when a massive blowout where he only played 22 minutes. There's a small risk of blowout here, but not a terribly big risk. He should fit. I think he's going to get around 30 minutes in this game, and he has 55 fantasy point upside in this one. So he's a great play here. He's one of my favorite plays on the board. He's averaging a ridiculous 1.39 fantasy points per minute. He's playing very similar to the way Oscar Tshiebwe does for Kentucky, so I think he's in a great spot here, and I expect him to continue that. Overall, I think the slate is pretty good. It's not quite as ideal as some slates are. From the value play perspective, there are available, but in order to get Edey in your lineup, you're going to have to, play around some. But overall, it's a good slate. I think it'll be a fun slate, and I think we'll have some pretty good games here. So, with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave it below, and have a nice day, guys.